Last week we focused on the idea of a worldview, but don't worry if you find that people can't immediately identify and articulate their own worldview. Now the course will push into the types of questions that a worldview needs to answer. We'll start with questions of origin. John Lennox will look at different theories of how the universe came into being. He'll look at the evidence for the universe having a designer and the problems that are left by any explanation which assumes that the universe came from nothing. We hope that even though you might find this more stretching, you'll see that the popular notion that science has left no room for the existence of a creator is entirely false.
John Lennox is one of our fine colleagues and at the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics, and also a professor of pure mathematics at Green College in Oxford University. I've always teased him about the fact that I didn't know there was any such thing as pure mathematics because I didn't do very well in that subject. This gentleman is a triple doctorate, one in philosophy, one in math, one in science. He's debated people like Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and others. But you know, his tremendous strength, incredibly, is that in the knowledge of the scriptures. So while he is dealing with philosophical issues like naturalism and science and faith and how they interrelate and so on, just understand he knows both of these sides very well. John Lennox is a great colleague to have on our team, and you will be truly stretched in your thinking and informed in your motivation as to how to handle this tough subject and this tough bridge between the intellectual side of the scientific arena and the commitment side of what you believe on ultimate reality.
Teaching about creation is foundational to biblical theism. In its first sentence, the Bible states that there is a God who is the creator of the universe. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This statement challenges the idea that science has proved Genesis wrong. For here is one thing at least that the Bible and science agree upon, that there was a beginning. The universe has not always been there. And what is particularly striking about this is that the Bible has for centuries been saying that there was a beginning, whereas scientists only began to take this idea seriously relatively recently. Ironically, when more and more scientific evidence began to emerge that suggested that the universe had not existed forever, as had been believed for centuries, some leading scientists strongly resisted the idea, as they thought it would play into the hands of those who believed in creation. They didn't get their way, however, as the evidence for a beginning was too strong, and so the Big Bang model of the universe was born. It is important to realize that the term Big Bang is one that is used to describe the belief that the universe, or more accurately space-time, had a beginning. Alex Vilenkin of MIT, one of the world's leading cosmologists, says, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There's no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." And Arno Penzias, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics for discovering a trace of that beginning, an echo of creation, the so-called cosmic microwave background, said, "The best data we have are precisely what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole." One is tempted to suggest that if the biblical teaching on creation had been taken more seriously, scientists might well have looked earlier for evidence that there was a beginning. A central idea then in creation is that the physical universe depends on God for its existence. God brought it into being. However, the Bible does not teach the deistic notion that God started the universe but takes no further interest in it. It teaches rather that God continues to hold the universe in being by the word of his power. The universe continues to depend on him. Without him, it would cease to exist. Now, although the Genesis text does not explicitly say that the universe was created from nothing, ex nihilo, as the technical phrase goes, this implication is clear. Firstly, the phrase in Genesis, the heavens and the earth, is most likely to denote everything in the material universe, in which case the implication is that God created everything in the material universe. There was no material there before. And that understanding is confirmed by the New Testament, where John, in the first words of his gospel, writes this: "In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made." The key point is this: the word translated made means came to be or came to exist. And so what is being claimed here is that this universe came to be. There was a time when it didn't exist at all. There was no material. God himself did not come to be. He is eternal and uncreated. He, as the text says, is the Word who already was. There's further support for this in the letter to the Hebrews. In chapter 11, verse 3, we read, "By faith we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible." Material is seen. It is visible. So here is more confirmation that the universe was not made out of pre-existing material. And finally, Revelation 4:11 says, "Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created." The implication is that the universe came to be because God willed it to be. Once more, we deduce from this that the universe was not formed out of pre-existing material, since there was none from which to create it. However hard it is for us to get our minds around the idea. Now, since scientists in the main agree with Genesis that there was a cosmic beginning, they're faced with a big question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And that brings me to one of the most famous philosophical arguments for the existence of God, the cosmological argument. Since everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, then the universe must have a cause, namely God. And the father of modern cosmology, Alan Sandage, agreed. "I find it quite improbable that such order came out of chaos," he wrote. "There has to be some organizing principle. God to me is a mystery, but he is the explanation for the miracle of existence, why there is something rather than nothing." On the other hand, naturalists and materialists hold that the universe is the ultimate reality, not God. They are therefore logically forced to think that the universe explains itself, hence their problem. How does nothing turn itself into something? Does the universe generate itself? One of the greatest living scientists is Stephen Hawking, and the central argument of his book, The Grand Design, co-authored with Leonard Mlodinow, appears to be this. I quote, "Because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing." The first question to ask is, what does Hawking mean when he uses the word nothing? The universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Because at the beginning of the sentence he says, "because there is a law of gravity." So he's therefore assuming that there is something. A law of gravity exists, and that's certainly not nothing. One also presumes that he believes that gravity exists, for the simple reason that an abstract mathematical law on its own would be vacuous and meaningless with nothing to describe. So gravity, or a law of gravity, exists, and that certainly is not nothing in the philosophically correct sense of the word non-being. So Hawking contradicts himself, which is very surprising in such a high-powered physicist. However, the situation gets even worse when we consider his use of the word create. Look again at his statement. The universe can and will create itself from nothing. Now, if we say X creates Y, that means we're presupposing the existence of X in order to explain the existence of Y. That's a simple matter of what the words mean. If therefore we say X creates X, we're presupposing the existence of X in order to account for the existence of X. And this is obviously self-contradictory and logically incoherent, even if we put x equal to the whole universe. To presuppose the existence of the universe to account for its own existence sounds like something out of Alice in Wonderland, not science. Now, it's very seldom that one finds in one statement two distinct levels of contradiction, but Hawking appears to have found one. He says the universe comes from a nothing that turns out to be something, self-contradiction number one. And then he says the universe creates itself, self-contradiction number two. Professor Peter Atkins, who's professor of physical chemistry at Oxford, doesn't do any better. He writes, space-time generates its own dust in the process of its own self-assembly. He calls this the cosmic bootstrap, referring to the ludicrous idea of a person lifting himself by pulling on his own bootlaces. Our Oxford colleague Keith Ward does not hesitate to say that Atkins' view of the universe is as blatantly self-contradictory as the name he gives to it, pointing out that it is logically impossible for a cause to bring about some effect without already being in existence. Ward concludes, between the hypothesis of God and the hypothesis of a cosmic bootstrap, there is no competition. We were always right to think that persons or universes who seek to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps are forever doomed to failure. Atkins' self-generation of the universe explanation is, of course, demanded from him by his materialist worldview, not his science. Physicist Lawrence Krauss of the Arizona State University fares even worse. In his book, A Universe from Nothing, he complains that theologians and philosophers say that nothing is non-being in some vague and ill-defined sense. But Krauss is wrong. Nothing is non-being in a perfectly clear and well-defined sense of the absence of anything. And Krauss then goes on to say, surely nothing is every bit as physical as something, especially if it is to be defined as the absence of something. This is sheer nonsense. Nonsense, incidentally, remains nonsense, even if it is spoken by scientists. The universe is something physical, so nothing, the absence of the universe, is physical, according to Krauss. This is simply absurd. And David Albert, a philosopher at Columbia University, is trenchantly critical of this, not surprisingly. Krauss is dead wrong, he writes, and his religious and philosophical critics are absolutely right. If what we formerly took for nothing turns out on closer examination to have the makings of protons and neutrons and tables and chairs and planets and solar systems and galaxies and universes in it, then it wasn't nothing and it couldn't have been nothing in the first place. And the history of science, if we understand it correctly, gives us no hint of how it might be possible to imagine otherwise. Materialism seems to be coming apart at the seams. It is certainly no answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing? It will, however, be objected that if you believe in God as the first cause, then surely you must logically ask what is the cause of God's existence. Putting it another way, as Richard Dawkins does in one of his main arguments in his book, The God Delusion, if God created everything, we should have to ask who created God. This is the old question, but a question that is very often asked today. Who created the Creator? Now, the very asking of this question reveals at once that Dawkins has in mind a created God. Who created God? And created gods, a moment's thought will tell you, certainly are a delusion. However, the God who's revealed in the Bible is uncreated, as we've seen, so that the who created God argument falls to the ground. Dawkins' difficulty, therefore, must be that he cannot believe in something eternal. Why not? Science certainly doesn't tell us that there is nothing eternal. Indeed, the notion of an eternal universe or eternal energy has dominated human thought for centuries, and it still hasn't disappeared for academic circles. Now, Dawkins' question can be turned back on him. He believes that the universe created him. Therefore, we are justified in asking him, who created your Creator? And I still have heard no answer to that question, which I put to him directly. The point here is that all such questionings must stop with what the questioner believes ultimate reality is. For the atheist, the ultimate reality is the universe, and for the theist, the ultimate reality is God. So Genesis tells us that God is primary and the universe is derivative. This worldview is the exact opposite of ancient polytheism and contemporary secularism, both of which assume that matter is primary and everything else, including mind, is derivative. It is, of course, for us to decide which worldview makes the most sense of the world as we find it. Now comes the question, must we choose between science and God? The conviction that the universe is orderly is germinal to science. Melvin Calvin, who won the Nobel Prize for Biochemistry, has no doubt about the source. He says, as I try to discern the origin of that conviction, that is, that the universe is orderly, I seem to find it in a basic notion discovered 2,000 to 3,000 years ago and enunciated first in the Western world by the ancient Hebrews. Namely, that the universe is governed by a single God and is not the product of the whims of many gods, each governing his own province according to his own laws. This monotheistic view, says Calvin, seems to be the historical foundation for modern science. Most of the great scientific pioneers were believers in God and creation. Galileo, Kepler, and Newton, to name just three. And C.S. Lewis sums it up this way. He writes, men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. That is, far from belief in God, the creator, hindering science, it was the very motor that drove science. So science has a very deep debt to Christianity, which conflicts clearly with the idea that science and Christianity have nothing to do with each other. And still today, you will find there are many fine scientists who believe in God, like William Phillips, physics Nobel Prize winner. Why then is it the case that some leading scientists like Stephen Hawking say that we must choose between science and God? One reason I'd like to suggest is this, that they are confused, seriously confused about the nature of God, for they think that theists in general and Christians in particular believe in the so-called God of the gaps. That is, I don't understand it, therefore God did it. If there's no scientific explanation, we simply say that God did it and we cover over a gap. Just like the ancients, who thought that thunder was a god roaring his displeasure. Science got rid of that god by doing a bit of atmospheric physics. Now, of course, if you think of God as a God of the gaps, then clearly the more science, the less God by definition. But the God of the Bible is not a God of the gaps. He is the transcendent creator, the God of the whole show. Without God, there'd be nothing there for physicists like Stephen Hawking to study. So in particular, it follows that God is the creator both of the bits of the universe we don't understand and the bits we do. And of course, it's the bits we do understand that give the most evidence of God's existence and activity. Just as I can admire the genius behind a work of engineering or art, the more I understand it, so my worship of the Creator increases the more I understand what he has done. That leads us to the second reason that Hawking asks us to choose between God and science. He confuses physical law and personal agency. The choice that he asks us to make is between false alternatives. They don't belong to the same category. His call for us to choose between physics and God is as manifestly absurd as demanding that we choose between physics and the aeronautical engineer Sir Frank Whittle in order to explain the jet engine. For Frank Whittle is a personal agent. He designed and invented it. The principles of physics are the science that help us to understand what he did. And we need both explanations in order to fully understand a jet engine. That category mistake was not made by a previous holder of Hawking's chair at Cambridge, Sir Isaac Newton. When Newton discovered his law of gravitation, he did not say, "Now I have the law of gravity, I don't need God." No, what he did was to write Principia Mathematica, the most famous book in the history of science, expressing the hope that it would persuade the thinking man to believe in God. The point here is this: the laws of physics can explain how the jet engine works, but not how it came to exist in the first place. It is self-evident that a jet engine could not have been created by the laws of physics on their own. That task needed the intelligence and creative engineering work of Frank Whittle. Come to think of it, even the laws of physics plus Frank Whittle could not on their own produce a jet engine. There also needs to be some material around the place that is subject to those laws and that can be used by Whittle to make the engine. There is a further reason why we should not regard science and God as opposed. Science has its limits. The Nobel Prize winner Sir Peter Medawar wrote, "The existence of a limit to science is made clear by its inability to answer childlike elementary questions having to do with first and last things. Questions such as, how did everything begin? What are we all here for? What is the point of living?" The very success of science is due to the narrowness of its focus. It tends to concentrate on the how questions, but not on the questions of purpose, value, and meaning. Now, the Bible concentrates mainly on those questions, although, as we have seen, it does have some very important things to say about the origin of the physical universe. We now should come to some other results of science that point towards God. Science has shown that the Earth occupies what is called the Goldilocks zone. That is, its position in space and its constitution are just right so that it can sustain life. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, etc., etc. Furthermore, physicists have demonstrated that many of the fundamental constants of nature, from the energy levels in the carbon atom to the rate at which the universe is expanding, have just the right values for life to exist. If you change any of them just a little, then the universe would become hostile to life and incapable of supporting it. For instance, Paul Davies tells us that if the ratio of the strong nuclear force to the electromagnetic force had been different by 1 part in 10 to the power 16, that's 1 with 16 zeros after it, no stars could have formed. Again, the ratio of the electromagnetic force constant to the gravitational force constant must be equally delicately balanced. Increase it by only 1 part in 10 to the power 40 and only small stars can exist. Decrease it by the same amount and there'll only be large stars. Both large stars and small stars are needed to have a universe like ours. The large ones to produce elements in their thermonuclear furnaces, and only the small ones burn long enough to sustain a planet with life. So we need both. According to Paul Davies, that's the kind of accuracy a marksman would need to hit a coin on the far side of the observable universe 20 billion light years away. Like every other physicist, Stephen Hawking is confronted with very powerful evidence of design, as he explains in his book. Our universe and its laws appear to have a design, he writes, that both is tailor-made to support us, and if we are to exist, leaves very little room for alteration. That is not easily explained, and raises the natural question of why it is that way. He goes on to say this: the discovery relatively recently of the extreme fine-tuning of so many of the laws of nature could lead at least some of us back to the old idea that this grand design is the work of some grand designer. That is not the answer of modern science, says Hawking. Our universe seems to be one of many universes, each with different laws. And so we arrive at the idea of a multiverse. And roughly speaking, the notion here is that there are so many universes, some suggest infinitely many, whatever that means, that anything that can happen will happen in some universe somewhere. It's not surprising then, so the argument goes, that there is at least one universe like ours. Now we note in passing that Hawking has fallen into the common trap of offering false alternatives, God or the multiverse. From a theoretical point of view, God could create, of course, as many universes as he pleases. Of itself, then, the multiverse concept doesn't rule God out. Also, Hawking's claim to be giving the answer of modern science gives a very false impression where the multiverse is concerned, since there are weighty voices within science that do not support Hawking's view. For instance, John Polkinghorne, also an eminent Cambridge theoretical physicist, rejects the multiverse concept. Let us recognize these speculations for what they are, he writes. They are not physics, but in the strictest sense, metaphysics. There is no purely scientific reason to believe in a whole ensemble of universes. By construction, these other worlds are unknowable by us. A possible explanation of equal intellectual respectability and, to my mind, greater economy and elegance would be that this one world is the way it is because it is the creation of the will of a creator who purposes that it should be so. And famous cosmologist Edward Harrison reacts very similarly. Here, he says, is the cosmological proof of the existence of God, the design argument of Paley, updated and refurbished. Take your choice. Blind chance that requires multitudes of universes, or design that requires only one. Many scientists, he goes on, when they admit their views, incline towards the teleological or design argument. Hawking's ultimate theory to explain why the laws of physics are as they are is called M-theory, a theory of supersymmetric gravity that involves very sophisticated concepts such as vibrating strings in 11 dimensions. Hawking confidently calls this the unified theory that Einstein was expecting to find. However, Paul Davies, who's not a theist, says of M-theory, it's not testable, not even in any foreseeable future. And Oxford physicist Frank Close goes even further. M-theory is not even defined, he says. We are even told no one seems to know what the M stands for. Perhaps it is myth. Close concludes, I don't see that M-theory adds one iota to the God debate, either pro or con. And John Butterworth, who works at the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, states that M-theory is highly speculative and certainly not in the zone of science that we have got any evidence for. It ought also to be pointed out that the postulation of many universes does not in any case necessarily increase the probability of there being a bio-friendly universe like ours, as a mathematical investigation of the so-called inverse gambler's fallacy shows. I'm tempted to add that belief in God seems, in any case, an arguably more rational option if the alternative is to believe that every other universe that possibly can exist does exist, including, for instance, one in which Richard Dawkins is the Archbishop of Canterbury, Sam Harris the Pope, and Billy Graham has just been voted Atheist of the Year. The fine-tuning of the universe is scientific evidence that points towards the existence of an intelligent creator. What it says in effect is that this universe is very special. It has exactly the right construction in order for it to be possible to have life within it. Now, the Genesis account says something very similar, though in very different language. It tells us that there was a sequence of steps that start with the creation of the universe and end with the creation of human beings. That is, there is purpose in creation, the purpose of having human beings that, alone among all creatures, are made in God's image. This gives human beings a unique dignity and value, and it is here that we find the source of morality. What is more, Genesis emphasizes that each step in the creation narrative is initiated by the phrase, "and God said." That is, you do not get from one step to the next step without God speaking. It is surely obvious that this is the exact opposite of a mindless, unguided process demanded by naturalism. This is the genius of God's creative intelligence in action. And one of the most marvelous features of life ever discovered surely bears evidence of this. In each one of the 10 trillion living cells in the human body, there's to be found a coded word written in a chemical alphabet, the human genome. It's the longest word ever discovered, being 3.5 billion letters long. Before Richard Dawkins rose to prominence, perhaps the best known atheist was the eminent philosopher Antony Flew, who attacked Christianity both in writing and in public debate. However, much to the chagrin of the new atheists, Flew announced that he had become convinced that the scientific investigation of DNA had shown, by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life, that intelligence must have been involved. Flew insisted that his major change of mind was due to obeying Socrates' famous command, "We must follow the argument wherever it leads." This is one of the main reasons why the statement, "In the beginning was the Word, all things were made by him," makes far more sense to me as a scientist than the atheist's assertion that the origin of life involves nothing more than unguided, mindless natural processes. The Genesis account of creation, though not written as polemic, is diametrically opposed to all idolatrous interpretations of the universe, whether ancient pagan or the modern secular variety. Genesis clashes head-on with the Babylonian, Canaanite, and Egyptians' polytheism just as much as the Gospel of John contradicts their Greek and Roman equivalents. In particular, ancient Near Eastern accounts typically contain theogonies, which describe how the gods are generated from primeval matter. These gods are therefore mere deifications of nature and its powers. This means actually that such ancient worldviews stand much closer to contemporary materialism than might at first appear. There are, for instance, contemporary physicists like Paul Davies who argue that the fine-tuning of the universe indicates that there's great intelligence somewhere out there. But nevertheless, this intelligence must have evolved from primitive matter like every other intelligence. That is, it is of material origin. There's a very common atheist argument these days that first notes that Christians are atheists with regard to these ancient gods like Ra, Marduk, Zeus, and Thor. The argument then goes on to say that we atheists just add one more god to the list. This demonstrates that they do not understand the vast difference between these ancient gods and the God of the Bible. For the God of the Bible is not a product of primeval matter or human imagination. He is the transcendent Lord and Creator of the universe. He created both matter and human imagination. He is not a material God. And furthermore, according to Genesis, God created the universe, but he is not identical with it. Noticeably, in the Genesis description, the sun, moon, and stars are described purely physically as lights. There isn't the slightest hint of conferring any kind of divinity on them, as in the contemporary pagan mythologies. Nor is the universe regarded as some kind of emanation out of God, like sun rays emanate from the sun. Matter is made out of nothing, not out of God. The Genesis account, therefore, bears no traces of Eastern pantheistic monism. It challenges naturalism. It stands unique in all of literature as witness to the beginning of the great story of God, a story that makes sense of everything else.